Another article I really liked about you, and that's the article Fascism in the Anti-Festival. And it was so wonderful, Charles, because I did a show on René Girard a few months ago, but
Mhm.
I kept it completely low level. We kept it with the myths and his books, Satan Falls from the Sky Like Lightning. I didn't connect it to today, even though I kept hinting at it for the audience. And because I think his ideas are so relevant, especially his ideas of the sacred scapegoat. As humans, I don't think we've gotten past that idea of that we need a sacrifice. We need as we project, we need our projections validated. So somebody has to be sacrificed. Somebody in the tribe has to be given up. I guess
Right.
they call it cancel culture today, right? Somebody,
Yeah.
and it's not just the left. I mean, remember the days of the Dixie Chicks and so forth when the right was the cancel
Oh
culture? I
yeah, the
know.
right invented cancel culture. I mean, they're the ones who were burning Beatles albums and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
know these days Kanye West is like the big jester of our society, but people
Mhm.
forget he came out 20 years ago what George Bush doesn't care about black people, and he got canceled brutally by the right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But what is this idea of we have to sacrifice with this holy
Yeah.
violence, and how can we stop it?
Yeah. So I think René Girard had his insights helped explain a lot that happened during COVID. So I wrote a 5 essay series on that, which is now in my book, The Coronation.
Mhm.
And and basically, it's a very ancient pattern where a society faces some kind of stress and tensions rise, and people start to blame each other, and tit for tat violence escalates. Uh, Retribution, cycles of vengeance, blood feuds, and these threaten to tear society apart. And they divide the society. I saw you with that guy, and he's the guy who killed my cousin. Which side are you on after all? So everybody has to choose sides, and it tears society apart. What can be done about this? Well, the historical pattern was that this riven society would unify in an act of violence against some kind of scapegoat, some kind of villain, a sacrificial victim who upon whom would be loaded all of the blame, all of the evil. So everyone would get together and kill this person or this group of people, thinking, now we've done something about it. And the bloodlust gets satiated, and that feeling of wrong must be righted, evil must be deposed. We've got to do something about it. Something has been done now. Everybody got together and did something about it. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because these uh, warring sides, these uh, divided camps, have unified in this act of killing, and now peace reigns. Because really, the conflict was because of the conflict. So now peace reigns. Something has been done, and because killing the victim erased the conflict, erased the tension, the victim must have been responsible for it to begin with. So that's where we get the idea of the arch villain, and so this pattern has replayed itself throughout history. When there's a social crisis, you look for a scapegoat or a scapegoat class upon whom to heap all of the blame. Could be the Jews, could be the witches, could be the Tutsis, it could be the unvaccinated. And whoever it is, they get associated with filth and with contagion and with
Mhm.
being dirty. And so the unvaccinated were prime candidates for the role of sacrificial victim. And you saw a lot of this, like, because the first step is exclusion. The first step is dehumanization. You have to ready them for the sacrifice by making them not fully of society. The Girard describes the ideal scapegoat, the ideal sacrificial victim, as being in but not of society, like partly outside society.
Mhm.
Because if they're fully in society, then they're a full person, and their kin will want to get revenge. You have to take somebody outside. So historically, prisoners of war would be used, but first they'd be a little bit integrated in society, or you know, virgin young women, you know, or children, slaves, people who are not fully, or even the king, who was outside society by being above it. In a lot of societies, the original sacrificial victim was the king, you know. And we have a little bit of that today when we vilify certain elite figures. It's the same pattern. We heap every possible evil imaginable onto them. Klaus Schwab, you know, Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci. Like, okay, and maybe they fit the role pretty well, but you know, some of these mythologies, you know, have them, you know, devouring babies in satanic rituals. And whether or not they are actually doing that, this fits the pattern of the sacrificial victim. They have to take on evil, whether through their own actions or being projected onto them. They're serving an essential social service. They're serving an essential function by doing this. And that's why kings were even expected to violate taboos. Like marriage taboos, you know, they would marry their sisters and stuff. I mean, this is even in Game of Thrones, right? Like they had to take evil onto themselves. And sometimes, so then the king didn't always like this arrangement of being sacrificed. So eventually he would substitute, maybe there would be a temporary king who would reign for the duration of a festival. And during the festival had absolute arbitrary power and would use that for depravity, you know. But at the end of the festival, he would be sacrificed, or maybe it would be a goat, ultimately, or an effigy. So today we have Burning Man. So this pattern is still strong with us, and a lot of what happened during COVID, like, cannot be understood without looking at this deep pattern of human nature. It can't be understood merely by science gone wrong or by manipulative elites, you know, or So what I was saying is
Jesus is an example. You know,
well,
the
that's a
purple
whole
robe, everything else.
right. Although Jesus, okay. Anyway, I'll just finish the thought. We can't fully understand what happened during the pandemic without the Girardian lens. You know, you can't understand it just by an evil conspiracy. You can't understand it just by you know, the orthodox view, the science, you know, a virus. Like, you cannot understand this without looking at this deep pattern of human beings that goes even before civilization.
You're 100% right. It nails it so much, even when Girard say, "We do not invent our gods; we deify our victims." Isn't that part of it? We sacrifice this person, but later we make him the king. I mean, Jesus was a criminal. Muhammad was a Moses was a criminal. He was a wanted murderer.
Yeah, Kennedy
George
even.
George Floyd was a criminal, and he was sort of
Right.
I mean, that's part of a very strange human nature. Is it guilt why we have to make them gods and heroes and all that afterwards, or a guilt that we've done something wrong because Jesus and Muhammad or George Floyd didn't deserve, you know, being ostracized and killed at the end of the day? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So there are reverberations of the Christ story, which actually is constructed to overthrow the pattern, because unlike the classic myth in which the sacrificial victim takes on all of the uh, apparatus of evil, Christ is explicitly described as innocent, and and doesn't fit into that pattern. It's his blamelessness is necessary to instigate a new myth,
Right.
and his innocence speaks to the innocence of all of the sacrificial victims of mob violence. Even if they were guilty of something, they weren't guilty of what the mob projects onto them as evil and blame for the crisis of society. So like um, capital punishment is another manifestation of this pattern, where the idea is there's been a disruption to the social order. The gods are displeased. Something has to be done. A sacrifice needs to be made. And so we execute the victim. And it doesn't even matter necessarily if the victim was guilty. Something still needs to be done according to this social psychology. And yeah, anyway, there's in my book, I cite quite a lot of the scholarship around this, and it's probably a bit deeper than I want to go right now.